Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to our afternoon session. I hope you are all refreshed and energized after the lunch and ready for a very special segment of our program, and that is Speak Talks segment. It is my great honor to introduce the speaker for this segment, and he is Dr. Hussain Jilur Rahman, Executive Chairman of the Power and Participation Research Center, PPRC. Dr. Rahman is an economist, a political sociologist, and a visionary leader who has devoted his career to promoting inclusive growth and institutional reform. He has also served on the Independent South Asian Commission on Poverty Alleviation and contributed significantly to shaping Bangladesh's national poverty reduction strategy. It is my distinct honor to invite Dr. Hussain Jilur Rahman to the stage to deliver his insightful remarks. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I know it's after lunch, so all I'll demand is 50% of your attention. The conference, Bay of Bengal Conversation, has a title, Rivals, Ruptures, and Realignments. Very evocative title, giving multiple signals. I want to pick out the word ruptures and start my talk with posing the question, is rupture here a fact or a question? Are you to take that ruptures has happened, or are you posing a question that there is rupture happened, or in what sense, etc., etc. So in one sense, I think the answer is yes, because we have had this major political change in 2024, and it's not an ordinary type of change. It's a very deep and multi-layered change. But I think the question can still be posed. Was that a rupture? And I think I want to really use this small window of time to elaborate on that. And since that August 2024, Bangladesh has, passed almost 15 months now. There has been many types of changes. Ambitions have been articulated. Many reform ideas have been floated. And the interim government has undertaken ambitious agendas. The political reality has seen many types of engagement, etc. But in terms of focusing on this word rupture, what I want to ask the question, or my most important concern, is in the reality of ideas, the type of ideas which are driving or which are contending how the future of this country, or this country as it locates within the global scenario, how is that playing out? And I think in that sense, Bangladesh remains a very important battleground of ideas, as it should be. And I think as many countries not just in the global south, even in the global north too, are really struggling, even including in the United States, may I say, this battle of ideas. And I think in terms of if I narrow down this battleground of ideas, which are the key concerns around which this idea battle merits attention and is perhaps helping to shape the reality as it is unfolding. One certainly is the nature of the state. I think it's very important to understand that the state is obviously it's an institutional reality, but how should the state relate to society? How does state in a way embody and carry forward the aspirations of its population? This is a very important idea battle which has to be fought, which is being fought as we speak in a way, because there are multiple ideas trying to really shape the outcomes as we talk about. And here it is very important not just to think of the state as like a body of institutions, state as process. For example, how is power not institutionally defined? How is power exercised for example, within the courtrooms, on the streets, in the other places? So state, I think, is a very important idea issue on which society is engaged, and I think we will continue this battle as we move forward, because I think we had these ideas of state as the developmental state. For a while, East Asia taught us that was the single most important idea emerging from East Asia, state as the driver of development. I think we have crossed those phases, and the link with state and the two words justice and trust have become very important in terms of how state relates to society. That's one idea. The other is the idea of growth. Growth itself is no longer just an idea of the economists. And it will be sad if we just boil down the idea of growth to the idea of GDP and some numbers and some infrastructures. Growth is a vital idea battleground in terms of what are the priorities to think about. And I think growth process itself has to be understood as a democratic battleground, because there are so many voices trying to enter that space, trying to project their own demands and see how things are happening or not. So growth itself, I think, for 15 years, we had a certain growth model which was infrastructure-based, which was not, it was exclusionary to a large extent. It actually eroded economic democracy. It, in a way, institutionalized corruption. So in all those areas, growth itself is an idea that we have to really think about. The other issue is, of course, education is also a vital idea ground. One of the unfortunate realities, and unfortunately last 15 months in Bangladesh, we have not really engaged on this vital idea battle. One of the realities we see is that education is not translating into human capital. There is education, there is expansion of number of institutions, etc., but not necessarily increase in the human capital per se. This disjuncture between education and human capital is something we have to really contend with because of the way the society we want to create. Also, the idea of empowerment. At 15, 20, 30 years ago, it would be seen as a self-evident good, self-evident term. What does empowerment mean? I think now we see that empowerment itself, for example, inclusion is a word very often used in empowerment. But we see that inclusion is not necessarily translating into empowerment. That's another of the disjuncture on which idea battle needs to be fought. Finally, the other idea battleground is how does a society like Bangladesh relate itself to the external world in the global order of things. And that's, I think, an important, even the word, I take issue with the word global order, because as soon as you use the word order, it denotes a certain sort of solidity. But today's world, at this moment in time, I think is defined by great fluidity. It's a fluid landscape rather than a new order. And in this fluid landscape, capable contenders have the chance to move ahead. The reality is fluid, and those who can move ahead are those who are becoming capable. And I want to end on that ruptures, I started with the word rupture. And if I take Bangladesh as a case example, the last 15 months, are we seeing an elite-driven illusion of change, or are we seeing a resilient psychology trying to really contend with the battle of ideas? That's an answer on which all of you will have to explore. The rupture, political change, was it rupture? The last 15 months and the next 15 months there's going to be election. Is it going to be elite-created illusion of change, or is it going to be substantive transformation in the areas that we have I mentioned? So I will end here on the saying that the reality is one, and I think conversation like this, of this particular conference, the importance here is the call to action, is the absolute importance of remaining engaged. There is no option to walk away from any of these battlegrounds. The battlegrounds have to be engaged with, have to be fought for, have to be won with. And I will end by saying that we have seen one type of coalition, which has really, the word coalition has been in much vogue. We have seen the political space coalitions in vogue, actually. But if these idea battles that I mentioned, countries like Bangladesh, because we have also seen that the ruptures has really led to basically illusion of change in multiple countries. So if sustained transformation is to happen, we need new coalitions. And the type of coalition that I'm calling for is a new one, a new type of coalition, a coalition of activists, particularly youth activists, entrepreneurs, and professionals. I think this type of coalition is the coalition which has been missing in the attempt to go forward when political windows have opened for deep-seated transformation. I call upon everyone that I personally am myself want to engage on this new type of coalition of activists, entrepreneurs, professionals. Coalition word should not be appropriated only by the politicians. The job is much bigger than the one that the politicians can deliver. And the space for this type of coalition exists and should be contended with. Thank you very much for your attention.
Aku suka Rikubaya. Greetings in Myanmar language, and good afternoon, everyone. I welcome you all to our next exciting session titled From Silos to Systems, Rewriting the Global Data Order. This session explores how AI is reshaping power and how our fragmented data systems must evolve to govern it responsibly. We are joined today by an excellent panel of global experts and leaders to guide us through this urgent conversation. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our speakers to the stage. Mr. Subhamal Bhattacharya, Treasurer and Head Critical and Emerging Technologies, the Society to Harmonize Aspiration for Responsible Engagement. Mr. Masudur Rahman, IT Strategy and Digital Transformation Leader, Big Four Consulting Firm. Mr. Hussain Jilur Rahman, Executive Chairman, Power and Participation Research Centers. Mr. Faiz Ahmed Toyab, Special Assistant to Honorable Chief Advisor. And Miss Veronica Portugal, Founder and CEO, Paideia Civica Mexico. And OS Pare, Country Economic Advisor, UNDP Bangladesh, as moderator. Mr. Moderator, the floor is yours.
Yeah. Hi. Good afternoon. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you very much for coming. I know this is probably the second last session, so you have already run the marathon. We're very close to the finish line, so thank you very much. This is going to be a very exciting session. I look forward to it because I'm here to learn. I'm just an economist, a data user, so I have to learn from the experts, how data is generated, how it's being utilized. Before coming here, I was thinking, as a moderator or even as a speaker, we oftentimes try to say something at the beginning which is humorous. I couldn't think of any joke related to data and AI because I know AI is going to be a cross-cutting theme today. Then I did what we do these days because we have outsourced a lot of our thinking to AI. So I checked with AI to give me some jokes on AI. And there was one which I thought was quite relevant to this session. And it said something like, how do you cheer up a sad AI? And you do that by saying that it was a training error. So I thought it was quite relevant to how data is, of course, is something that AI feeds on, but is not always responsible for what comes out of it. It depends on a lot of different parameters and so forth. I grew up, started work as an economist. I mean, we were familiar with algorithms and all that, but now we are, and that had a pretty predefined parameters, and you knew what you were dealing with. But AI is now imitating human thinking, which becomes extremely complicated. But as I said, AI, of course, feeds on data. And data, again, looking at my professional work, we always looked at data from conventional sources, whether it was surveys, census, but then something happened, which was digitalization. Some very clever people looked at data that was being generated on social media, things that we do, buying, selling, traveling. So that generated a lot of data. So that data was effectively used to get new insights, develop tools and services to make our life easier, convenience. But there's also the dark side to that as well. And we'll talk about it later. To get the conversation going, let me start with Mr. Faiz Ahmed Taib. I'm starting with you, Mr. Taib, because I know you have to leave soon. Maybe you can give us a perspective from a developing country. I know you're engaged in looking at the governance, AI-related data, and as I mentioned, data, the sources of data are changing. A lot of this so-called big data is being used increasingly be used in decision-making. And as a policymaker who is sort of in the middle of this all, so what is happening in Bangladesh? What is perhaps you're looking at outside Bangladesh? And how is that shaping governance and the response here in Bangladesh?
First of all, do you hear me? Am I audible? Yeah. First of all, I would like to thank CGS for inviting me here. And when it comes to AI, actually, to some extent, I would like to avoid buzzwords. So what I'm doing here, or our government is doing at this moment, we are trying to fix the basic foundations so that we can have and we can build an AI-driven society. So, and that is when we started our journey, we found that the 57 ministries and the departments we have within the government, they are all digital silos. So we found very little interoperability among the systems. And at the same time, we found that the legal foundations are not laid properly. So we had some very much criticized and heinous act in the name of Digital Security Act or Cyber Security Act. So we had to fix that, and we could not spend much time on it because of the urgency and because of the time, limited time we had at hand. And at this later on, we had to start working on personal data protection. Bangladesh never had a Personal Data Protection Act before September. So we tried to produce Bangladesh's first version of Personal Data Protection Ordinance. And here we talked about data subject, we talked about data fiduciary, data processors, and for the first time we tried to classify data in 4 categories. Of course, personal data, and then we try to make some mapping for personal consent-based cross-border transfer and bulk transfer. So the data fields that identifies a person, a biological person, we call it personally identifiable information, and those data we try to bring under the oversight of this Personal Data Protection Act. So Bangladesh needed this act, this ordinance, because there is no parliament, elected parliament, so we call it ordinance. So it was much needed also, not only from the personal data privacy perspective, but also our industries, the software industries, was not compatible with the US and the European countries where GDPR was in application. So we brought our organization, software industry, also in compliance so that they can work with the European firms and work as the back office or joint venture partner. And then later on, when we start constructing Personal Data Protection Act, we saw that there is no actually general data protection regulation also here in this country. So we created a National Data Governance Authority. So this authority will be overseeing some portion of the Personal Data Protection Act. It will have some role-based data sharing authorities, so that the data that will be belonging to the citizens, the ordinance and the authority together will give the mandate how institutions and organizations will collect, process, share, and sell data when it's related to personal data, personally identifiable data. And then we created some other parts in the authority, where we said that there will be some lawyers and data scientists together will form some data, what do you call, the data, how the data fiduciary will be transferring the ownership or processing the data, consent-based data sharing. So in total, the Personal Data Protection Act related activities has been covered in Personal Data Protection Ordinance, and the general data protection regulations has been brought under the oversight of the National Data Governance Authority. So together with this authority, we are trying to define how companies will be sharing data among themselves, collecting data, and generate consent on the data from the data subject. So, and there will be some compliance and also enforcement entities here. And at the both place, we try to create quasi-judicial bodies so that the grievance redressal system comes into the process, and persons, whether biological or legal person, can seek refuge when there is significant data breach has happened. When it comes to bulk personal data transfer, we said that is cross-border transfer allowed, subject to notification to the authority, and also we said that the authority must know the data calendar of the bulk transfer. I mean, what is the volume of transfer and what are the fields of transfer, so that the country, as a critical time, at a critical data breach period, the authority knows actually what type of data has been breached. And later on, we said that in case of data breach, the authority will have a mandate to return back the critical data within 2 months. So this is in general the data governance we are talking about. After that, we are now working with the World Bank so that all the ministries and the departments who has been deploying the hardware and softwares on silo basis, we are trying to connect all those so that they can get interconnected through APIs. And when this interconnectivity of the data will happen, then we can do two things. One is we can apply layers that will identify our citizens, and then also we can apply access to data for AI-related applications. The very first one is important. At this moment, 17 of our government ministries are storing public data in bulk, but without synchronization among each other. So we should have something called system-wide propagation, so that all the data fields stored in all those data centers or data registers have some synchronization. At this moment, our name can be different in different ministries, our birth dates can be different, our permanent and present address can be different. So we are not in a position to electronically identify a person through the electronic ID cards. So for that, we are creating a national authentication layer that will authenticate the citizens in the digital space. And the third thing is we are creating under the National Data Governance Authority, we are creating some guidelines and policy strategy papers for software and enterprise solutions, for AI policy, interoperability policy, this type of policies. And at the end, at this moment, we are working on Telecommunication Act, which is the mother law or lawsuit for our digital and telecommunication area. In that amendment, we are trying to address a number of things. One of them is we are trying to ensure that the current government, current administration, future government, or future administration will not shut internet for any cause, unless there is any emergency declared by the president of the state. So we are being very strict that the internet will never be shut here in this country from now on. So this is one thing we are trying to create legal protection for internet. The second thing is we are working on reforming surveillance regime. In this, with this, we are having some resistance, of course, but at the same time, the conversation and the dialogue with the law enforcement agencies are going on a constructive way, and we believe that we will be in a position that the surveillance regime will be applied in this country on a global standard based on best practices around the world. So this will be one of the last major changes from our side. And later on, we'll try, if time allows, we'll also try to adopt the Postal Act, because the postal services also deal with a number of critical personally identifiable information and address type of things. So we will try to adopt that one. And last not the least is we have amended cyber safety ordinance in a way that 90% of the cases has been dismissed. So more than 90% of the person who has been harassed by political bodies, law enforcement agencies from the previous administration, and also different ministries, government officials. So they have been relieved, and for some reason we had to accommodate religious and communal violence, hate speech related things, but necessarily we have tagged the violence with the hate speech. So we said hate speech will be a punishable offense only when it incites violence or it calls for violence. So at the two places of subsection 8 and 26, we have ensured that. So I would like to conclude like this. We are touching a number of legally founding stuffs like cyber safety, personal data protection, National Data Governance, Telecommunication Act, or Postal Act. So if we have been given with enough time, we could have arranged much more consultation. So this is a criticism against us that we could not arrange a lot of public consultation with the stakeholders. So this is something I acknowledge, but I believe the next elected parliament will further improve the works we have done, and I believe the freedom of expression will be upheld in this society. After the amendment of cyber safety ordinance, we see some improvement in the freedom on the net. Freedom House's 2025 ranking, we have achieved 5 points this year, and I believe we will be able to secure the first or at least the second position in the South Asian region with the help of our legal reforms we are doing in this digital area. So, and by the end of next year, with the help of our partners like Estonian team, European Union, EGA team, and also World Bank, I believe the digital public infrastructure will get a shape, and the AI policy team we have built, I think they will also deliver quality work. And meanwhile, we have received AI readiness assessment report from UNESCO and UNDP. So I think we are at a position to drive the digital transformation journey. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Mr. Taib, thank you very much. It seems a lot is happening as part of the reforms. The whole regulatory environment is being created, revised to meet the evolving and growing needs of how data can be shared, streamlined, and there's personal safety, safeguards are there. Transparency, you talked about that. Maybe now's the time I ask Veronica. Veronica works with the civil society organization in Mexico, because there are also, of course, fears of data being centralized, government. You hear the terms like surveillance, and you work with NGOs. Maybe you can tell us your experience in Mexico and what we can learn from them.
First of all, thank you. It's an honor to be here sharing the panel session with the top-notch experts and in this important conversation, and to bring a civil society perspective from Mexico and Latin America to the conversation. So what we are discussing today is not simply AI. It's about power, who holds it, who benefits from it, and who is left out. Across the Bay of Bengal region and across Latin America, we are living through the same paradox. AI is advancing at extraordinary speed, but governance is advancing slowly, and society is advancing unevenly. So this creates a widening gap between technological capability and the institutions meant to protect people. In Mexico, as in many places represented here, digitalization has produced vast but fragmented data ecosystems. So different ministries, different companies, platforms, and local governments collect data independently using different standards and different logics. And what happens when we build AI on top of fragmented, unbiased, incomplete data? The system inherits those fragments, biases, and blind spots. When governments deploy automated decision-making tools using pure data, people who are already marginalized, like rural communities, informal workers, women, indigenous groups, become invisible inside the system. So not because an algorithm wants to discriminate, but because the data itself reflects historical inequality. And this is where civil society must step in. Our role is to remind institutions that data is not infrastructure. It's people's life, it's their opportunities, it's their mistakes, their identities, and their future. So when digital reforms ignore transparency, trust collapses. So when trust collapses, public adoption collapses as well. So this is a lesson that we urgently need to carry across regions. Governance must be built with society, not only for society. So let me connect this to another reality that many countries here understand deeply, that is the protest. Yeah. They are the same conversation happening, but in a different language. When people protest, they are asking for three things: dignity, transparency, and a voice. These are exactly the same things people demand when they face opaque algorithms or automated decisions they cannot challenge. If we deploy AI without safeguards, we risk turning technology into another layer of opacity, especially in sensitive moments. So predictive policing, automated surveillance, and risk scoring can increase fear instead of trust. And when people don't know how decisions about them are made, social tension grows. So weak governance creates conflict, strong governance creates trust. So the question is, can responsible AI governance help create permanent social change? My answer is yes, but only when there are one condition, that is that people, communities, and civil society are co-authors of the rules. Technology alone does not transform societies, but technology combined with transparency, accountability, and participation can shift power in a lasting way. So public spending becomes traceable, making corruption harder. Algorithms are independently audited, reducing institutional abuse. Communities can challenge automated decisions, restoring balance. Data systems respect human rights, not just efficiency. Governments open the black box instead of hiding behind it. So I often say that AI will continue to evolve faster than any regulation that we write, but the values that we protect, like fairness, dignity, accountability, those must remain constant. If we anchor our governance in human rights rather than in technology trends, then the system remains relevant no matter how quickly the technology changes. So my message today from the civil society perspective is simple. Don't design governance for the machines. Design governance for the people. Because machines adapt to rules, but rules must protect human beings. So we have an opportunity here right now, not in the future, but today to shape how synthetic power will operate in our societies, not only in courts or ministries, but in daily life, in welfare systems, in healthcare, in migration, in education, in policy, in democracy. So the Bay of Bengal region and Latin America share something important, that we are regions where inequality is persistent, where innovation is fast, and where social movements are powerful. So that combination is challenging, but it's also hopeful. When governance, civil society, private sector, technologies, and communities sit at the same table, we begin to design governance that is realistic and human. AI is powerful, but yes, societies are more powerful when they are act together. So integrating society is not an event, it's a process, and it has to happen at the three levels: participation, transparency, and shared ownership. With participation, I mean that we bring people to the conversation from the very beginning, not at the end when the decisions are already made. That means that involving communities, activists, journalists, academics, and local organizations in the design of digital systems. Second, we push for radical transparency. People cannot participate if they don't know what the system is doing. So we demand open data, algorithmic explainability, and public reporting. When information is accessible, society becomes a real watchdog, not just a symbolic one. And the third one is shared ownership. We focus on shared ownership because society must not feel like a user. Society must feel like a co-author. We integrate social actors into monitoring bodies, ethics communities, and oversight mechanisms, not as advisors, but as decision makers. Once communities have a seat at the table, governance becomes more legitimate and more sustainable. So when you combine these three elements, participation, transparency, and shared ownership, society stops being an audience and becomes an architect. And it's the only way to be AI governance that lasts. Lastly, how AI relates to transforming protest into permanent change. That is something that we are living both Mexico and Bangladesh. Protests are powerful by themselves, but they are temporary. It's a moment of energy and outrage. But to create permanent change, we need a structure. We need accountable systems that channel that energy into actions that can be measurable, and also to get long-term oversight. This is where AI in data governance can play a role. Monitoring, early warning, AI can analyze patterns in social data, budgets, institutional behavior, to detect risks, inefficiencies, and corruption. And also, it can track implementation, deadlines, compliance, and resource allocation, amplifying civic participation. Well-designed AI platforms allow communities to report issues, give feedback, and participate in decision-making. And also, data-driven insights transform slogans into concrete demands and proposals, giving a structured arguments to push for policy change and hold authorities accountable over time. That's all, I think. You have any questions? I am open.
A round of applause. Thank you so much, Veronica. I mean, you alluded to a very simple truth we tend to forget often, that we're making these systems, AI, whether data, it should be all human-centric. And that can also provide the solution. You talked a lot about being a co-architect rather than someone you simply consult with. And that will help us to design this new ecosystem of data governance. And something else you mentioned, which was very powerful, you talked about transparency, you talked about dignity and accountability. We may prefer or like cricket here, and people in Mexico like soccer, but these are some universal traits or values that we all find very important: accountability, transparency, and dignity. So thank you so much. And we may get back to you with questions from the audience. Then maybe good to move on to the private sector. And you're the digital transformation leader. So how is private sector looking at it? At the governance, data, we heard that data is an asset. It's a commodity, it has a value. And when we talk about value, we think about private sector. How are they adapting? Are they thinking, oh, this is something we need to keep to ourselves because we lose our market advantage, or we become, we don't, it challenges them. So how is the private sector looking at it, and with the new governance that's also emerging here and in other countries?
Well, thank you very much. Can you hear me? Can you hear me okay? Am I audible? Yeah? Hello? Okay. All right, well, thank you. Thanks for that question. Let me start by first really thanking Zulurbai and CGS for really, making this opportunity for me to join this esteemed panel. To address the question, what I'm noticing, what I'm observing in the when I say private sector is essentially the corporate world, is that they look at AI as an accelerator. As an accelerator, they want to utilize AI and its capacity as a tool first, with the intent to really optimize and deliver shareholder value. So what that means is really you harness the power of AI to increase operational efficiencies, develop autonomous systems, to devise insight from data, but ultimately to reduce overhead and to provide basically a very personalized experience to their customer base. So that's really the driver, and in doing so, the corporations are looking at really optimizing maybe specific value chains separately at first. That's the initial sort of ramp up. What that means is maybe finance is looking at optimizing their finance value chain. Supply chain is looking at optimizing the supply forecasts and their shipment processes. The next evolution that we notice is in the horizon is really a concept where the corporations are adopting a concept of developing agentic AI In other words, developing agents that control other AIs. So by adopting that kind of a process, what you can do is really, again, automate the entire end-to-end value chain, starting from, let's say, from a customer experience perspective, a sales lead to a customer confirmation, to ultimately to an order creation, to a demand creation, to ultimately planning the manufacturing and fulfilling the order, receiving cash, and completing that whole end-to-end cycle for the company. So that's where the next evolution is. Now, in terms of data, the first speaker here, the esteemed advisor to the ICT, he mentioned silos of data, and the silos of data do exist. It not only exists in the government sector, but it also exists in the private sector. There are information silos that exist in the systems of corporations, and a lot of effort is invested in trying to harmonize that data so they have better insight into the profiles of their customers and products and markets. AI is helping in that space where you can utilize AI to essentially look at different systems, synthesize the data, and then really find ways to harmonize the data, find patterns, and be able to develop a 360-degree view of the customer. So those are the areas where how the companies are thinking about innovation. There's also, you're probably all familiar with automatic driving, autonomous driving systems. There's definitely a practical use of AI. So when it comes to governance, the corporations are essentially trying to abide or comply to the like the GDPR governance models, or in the U.S. To the executive orders and other regulatory mandates. What they are doing is kind of adopting a type of a social corporate responsibility for AI. In other words, be a responsible AI corporation by developing, by creating essentially chief AI officers and a whole department around that, so that they can actually be responsible and apply responsible ethical standards towards the use of AI.
Well, thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
I heard optimization, stakeholder, shareholder value, and customer service, which is important. A lot of it's being optimized to make the experience of the customer better, provide services. You also talked about the challenges, not only government that faces with streamlining, interoperability, data coming from different sources. So you in private sector also working on that. Maybe just to move this a little bit forward and to get a different perspective, I now ask Dr. Hussain Zilur Rahman to share your thoughts. I know you're also involved in policy making. You've been asked to advise on this new data governance that is being developed here. And earlier in your speech, you also talked about this alliance or coalition. You also talked about participation. Maybe you can also touch upon that, looking at this new data order and governance.
Okay, thank you. I'm sort of an outsider in this panel, meaning I don't have any particular technical expertise on this issue of data or AI, not on data, on AI. But for me, like a sentence, AI-driven society, for me is a non-starter. Because first we have to raise the issue of purpose. AI-driven society, you have already surrendered, so to say, the mental thought process to technology. Technology is at your service to transform society for the good. So AI-driven society will go into this, hyperbolic admiration for technology, but I think we need to be all the time cognizant that purpose is paramount here. And purpose is created by human agency, actually. We can define. There can be multiple purposes. We choose which purpose is more relevant at this point in time and the other at other point in time. So I think that's an important issue I would like to, that we take a sort of a balanced mindset view here. Because data, AI, these are not neutral issues. The data mindset is also a very important issue. You can have a lot of data which is not used, actually. Huge amount of examples here. Data which just sits there, is not used, is not relevant for decision making, etc. So I really want to bring up that issue of purpose here. Our Faiz Tayyab actually mentioned about they're doing that necessary first steps like preconditions of data governance, data infrastructures, etc., the legal governance. Those are important issues. But the purpose issue, we have to bring it forward, and I think that's a larger debate, Veronica would bring it forward in a certain way from the work she does. The private sector, they would see it as an accelerator, which is the right thing. I would say that, yes, that is an important one. But there are multiple purposes, and we cannot overprivilege one purpose over the other. All the purposes are actually relevant here. I would also make a point here about, again, data and informality is a very important interface we need to explore, particularly countries where informal is such a large part of the reality. How does data and AI not disempower or automatically criminalize or ostracize the informal? It's very important and we keep that in mind. I was just the other day, I was in it's called a slum in Gulshan area, Peril. I asked them to rename themselves as the Peril Community City rather than Peril Slum, because that's a community city gives a different connotation. There, they have data in terms of there are people who have lived there for 25 years, who are running a business, but that business does not graduate to a status of a data and government records. Because the land is public, somehow the government is not recognizing that. So these are, and I think in particular, we have to be mindful that we talk of capital in multiple, so there is financial capital, there is physical capital. For particular people at the lower end of the income spectrum or lower end of society or power structures, identity capital is also a very important issue. For example, Aadhaar card in India or NID here in Bangladesh, the national ID, these have been important identity capital for also the poor, actually. It has allowed them to establish an identity. I worked with the marginal groups in Bangladesh. And before 2006, the national data system did not recognize them as a separate category in the population segment. Now they do, actually. So this identity capital is also an important aspect of how we should understand this data, etc. Again, AI, as I said, it's obviously very important, as you mentioned, accelerator in multiple ways. We need to understand that. But we also be mindful of, and at the same time, we should not lose windows of opportunity. That's also true. that, for example, farmers of Bangladesh are perhaps illiterate, many of them, but are actually using weather forecasted information to prepare their crop calendar. That's an example of how things, so in countries like Bangladesh, this adaptation of data and this sort of technology is a vital field to think about. It should not just be the AI, for example, is helping pinpoint, for example, climate hotspots. We just had an earthquake the other day in Dhaka. These climate hotspots are a very important existential need, actually. AI can be a very important tool to identify this climate hotspot. So I will end here by saying that AI and data are very important issues that we should be discussing, but the issue of purpose should be kept uppermost in our mind. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just to underline, but a few words. Alignment, you talked about purpose, and not just one purpose. There are multiple purposes. Those need to be clearly defined. And you also talked about opportunities. We cannot remain passive because it can unlock these great opportunities. You gave examples of farmers. They can use AI to benefit from market information or technical information they need on maybe harvest and seed plantation. So there are definitely lots of opportunities. And I think we have seen that in many countries. It happened particularly with these fixed phone lines, that they were never able to invest enough to install the infrastructure, and then mobile phones happened. So we made that leap. And then some countries, I think it's that, there's that saying, it's the mother of necessity or something. Invention is the mother of necessity. And I think in case of Kenya, it was difficult to get or transfer money because of lack of bank branches, and they started using mobile phones to transfer money, and it became a huge business and is globally recognized. I think, I forgot the name, what was it? Mobile Kenya something, but it became a global success, and a lot of that was replicated in other countries. We also heard about identity, especially people living in informal communities, and you also talked about identity in terms of identification card and how it helps to get services. And you talked about Aadhaar, and we have our friend from India. I thought maybe now is a very good time to ask you, not only about Aadhaar, because that's something we have heard about, but please feel free to talk about that, and also what is happening in India with this new AI and data, how you're looking at the governance, what's the sort of the way forward?
Thank you, Mr. Peril. My appreciation to Mr. Zilur Rahman and everyone at CGS for this great event, and all friends here in Dhaka for your hospitality, as always we see whenever we come here. We are at the fag end of this 3-day Bay of Bengal conversations, and a lot of the conversations in this domain, as well as individually or in groups that we have had, obviously has added to a lot of the data that's also going to be used for future understanding of where we stand. But we are in a topic that is very, very, I would say, in the thing. All of us are some way or the other talking about data, dealing with data, seeing how data has changed from what we would have seen 20 years back. As a student of mathematics in the early 90s, I would have dealt with data in a different way to the Python programming that I would have done 6 years back, and would have seen that how I dealt with the data when I would have learned my C programming to when I learned my Python programming. There's so much of change. Now, what is the change? The change is that, data has become the new oil. Data carries now a lot of intelligence. And with that intelligence, we are able to do so many things. But most importantly, we are also able to apply it to our day-to-day life governance, day-to-day life activities as individuals, and good and bad, all of these things are now discussions on the table. Artificial intelligence and data have gained so much of currency that, as someone who has worked in cybersecurity for now more than 25 years, I see that in such a short time, this whole AI phenomenon has overshadowed cybersecurity concerns that would have been coming up with, networks getting more critical and data, again, out of them becoming critical. So what is it, that we need to be thinking aloud from a policy perspective, from individual users, from organizations, how critical data is, how do we keep it safe, how do we keep it sustainable? I think these are things that we really need to talk. My distinguished colleagues here have almost touched on many of the salient areas. The ICT advisor to the special assistant to the chief advisor has touched on how they were also looking at data and how do you handle them, in terms of how it will be consent-driven, which is exactly the same thing that we did in India, when we came to the regulation part. Veronica was great with the, real-life experience about how, you handle data and how a particular base of countries with a certain amount of data can deal with it. My friend Masudur mentioned about the accelerator nature of the data, and Rahman Saab mentioned about the purposeful and the purpose of how do we deal with data. These are very, very important facets that they've all picked up. And this is where, sir, the Indian experience, I can tell that we have almost tried to cover all of these things and placed something up there. So Mr. Rahman mentioned about Aadhaar. In a day, we do 9 billion authentications using Aadhaar. It's phenomenal. We have something known as the Digital Public Infrastructure, DPI stack, that we have placed to the world and particularly to the global south during our presidentship of G20. And the other part after Aadhaar is the digital payments, the unified payment interface system. In a day, we have more than 660 million transactions of the UPI. So this is the scale at which, in our country, we are handling data. The models have been successful all through. They have been scalable, they have been secure, and they have all been for a lawful purpose. Now, the success in the last, decade almost, because UPI has been there from 2016 and Aadhaar since the act was passed in 2009. The success over all these years where you are using IT systems in a secure manner, in a scalable manner, and you are able to do the authentications and all, is something that is a lesson that India is rightly putting across to the whole world. So how do we look at the data handling, the sensitive personal data, how do we handle that? What is the approach and philosophy to legislation? These are very, very interesting guidances for a lot of people to follow. And when the special assistant to the chief advisor was speaking, I was seeing that there is a similarity in which this philosophy of thinking is also happening here. If you followed closely this month, November, right at the beginning, we announced the changes to the intermediary guidelines rules in the country. And what we did, we introduced how we will regulate artificial intelligence generated content, which is legally termed as synthetic generated information. How will we deal with it? It's put across. It went through a public consultation process, and now there's going to be an implementation. We have also had our data protection rules notified just about a week back, which now brings into action the Personal Data Protection Act, which we passed in 2023. Now, some of the very salient features of this piece of legislation is that every bit of your personal data actually has to be consent-based. The purpose for which the data should be used, the proportionality and the time frame for which you should use, all these are very clearly mandated for the data fiduciary, and all of that would be watched by a data protection board at a very high level, nominated and appointed by the Government of India. Along with that, the existing legislations that we have for the information technology sector, the IT Act of 2000 amended in 2008, the regulations and guidelines that have been put in place in 11, 21, 23, all of this have dealt with data and how do we protect the data. So large amounts of data, large amounts of personal data, how do you deal with it? How do you ensure that now synthetically generated data, you are able to even legislate that? There's something known as deepfake, which all of you are aware of how it becomes quite an issue in almost every geography. It's not always easy to catch from where a particular deepfake has been generated. But this is something that we'll all have to collectively deal with. So when we are looking at an approach and we are talking about we are having silos of activities happening around the data ecosystem, I think there is a chance even in the Bay of Bengal region to be able to coordinate, to talk, to find ways and means to pick up from the best practices of each other and find a way in which we talk the same language, because we'll have to deal with data and more troves of data in months and years to come. And it's not that nothing has started at the global level. A lot of conversations are happening at regional levels. It is happening. How do you deal with data? For example, the United Nations, through the group of governmental experts, has been talking about the cyber aspect, if I'm not mistaken, 2004. I myself was an expert for the 2009 edition's agenda setting. So earlier this year in July, the 6 GGs that have happened and the OEWG, the open-ended working group meetings that have happened, have come to a conclusion with an idea that we are now going to have something known as the global mechanism in which we'll handle issues of cyber as well as data. I think it's a very welcome step. It's a very, very open-ended, inclusive approach in which this path has been achieved. And mind you, in all other parameters that you look as a kind of a global commons, say climate, space, or any other, there is a certain regulatory mechanism in place. In matters of data and cyber, there isn't anything globally binding, even from a point of view of non-binding arrangement also we don't have. So I think the first steps have been taken, and that's a good step. Some of the AI events have happened even at a very large scale. UK did it, France did it. Next year in mid-February, India is hosting the AI Impact Summit, where 22 heads of state and so many others are going to come. Bangladesh has been invited, I am aware of. So everyone is trying to now find a way that in which we converse globally about how do we handle data, how do we handle artificial intelligence, how do we see that the intelligence that we are generating out of this data remains to purpose, isn't misused, isn't spread across the dark net and the dark web and all the areas that we don't really want to go. Uh, so I think everyone has waken up to the purpose. It's that we better confabulate, we better communicate, we better learn from each other's experience so that we actually are able to handle it better. Mind you, the other part, as part of this global discussion is that, where the US stands, where the EU stands, where China stands, where others are standing, this is also a kind of positioning that is happening. The EU passed the first AI legislation anywhere in the world. It's primarily based on very tough measures, but protecting the citizens' data. So the focus on privacy and related aspects is very high. The Americans still want the innovation aspect around the data and the AI ecosystem to go further and moved as a private sector and innovation-driven activity. The Chinese have been again active on this front from a global scale about seeing about how data is still protected and it also doesn't become an issue of conflict. Countries like mine, have taken a very pragmatic approach of taking the best of every world and the piece of regulation that we have brought, the amount of experience that we are doing with large amounts of data, and leave aside the Aadhaar and UPI. In India, we process a lot of sensitive personal data as well as other business data of some of the large, companies or the corporations of the world. We have some of the biggest global capability centers of almost all the Fortune 500 companies stationed there. So all over the last few years, the experience of handling the data has been a very, very strong parameter in which this business to be growing over a compounded annual growth of more than 12 to 13% in this sector. So I think, as you, sir, gave me the platform, I think there was an India story really to say that how we have handled, how we look to the forward, how we remain engaged and carry everyone along in terms of all the global cooperation, both regulations as well as otherwise also. Thank you.
Thank you very much. A round of applause, please. I couldn't agree more with you about cross-border cooperation. I work for United Nations. We always want countries to learn from each other. And this data is something that doesn't understand borders. It travels across borders. And we do need work that should happen at a regional level, at a global level. And you mentioned some of the work is already happening, which is very encouraging, but a lot more can happen. And also using examples. What I'm always fascinated about India when it comes to scale, or China. It's always done, even an experiment has to be done at a scale. And it's then goes through this stress test. And if it works in India or China, it surely can work anywhere else. So that's good. Smaller countries, relatively speaking, can benefit from that because it's already been tested. And also keeping in mind that if it happens, it can happen in a developing country with a resource constraint. That's another indicator that it can work in other countries. So you can set a good example, then others can repeat that experience. So I think we have still 16 minutes. Let's open up for questions, comments, preferably questions. And if you don't mind, keep it short so that we can get as many questions as possible. Introduce yourself. You can walk up to the mic, introduce yourself, and then you can also mention who you want to address the question to, or it could be just for all the panel members to respond. And first of all, introduce yourself. Thank you.
Hello. Hello, my name is Abdul Alamin Abir. I'm a student of Dhaka Central University, and I'm honored to be here today. I learned many important ideas from today's speakers. I know some very meaningful points and prepare a few key questions. My first question is, does AI reveal what we think? Because when I use my phone after thinking, the video came to my according to the what I thinking. My next question, second question is, can AI help the identify highly risk earthquake zone in Bangladesh or world?
Sorry, what was that? The highly
Risky earthquake zones in.
Okay, I got it. All right, thank you very much. Let's respond to that, and then we can take any other question or just two. Two questions. Anyone wants to respond to whether AI knows what I'm thinking and when the next earthquake is going to happen? There was an earthquake recently here, so we are all worried. You please go ahead.
I can attempt to answer the first part of that question, and I'd welcome others to definitely chime in. I think what you're experiencing when you think of something and then you see a video or some news feed or some information about which you just thought. It could be two scenarios. One is it's just coincidental. That's number one. And that coincidence gives you a false reassurance that this was predicted. The other scenario is really that you have already left several breadcrumbs in the history of things that you are doing with your device or otherwise. Or because we live in a world where information is gathered from multiple different sources, the code is IoT, Internet of Things. That means there's smart devices as your Android phone, your iPhone, or you use a computer. Anywhere you have used some kind of a device, it is sharing information. And the big corporations like Facebook and TikTok and others, Google, they're gathering all this data. And they're using advanced technologies, and they're probably also using AI to really stitch all this disparate data and transforming that into information and then relating that information to you. That's where your privacy or your personally identifiable information, PII, comes into play, right? And so they make all these connections to then be able to say, I think either you or someone in your close coordinates or someone in your household is interested in this type of information. And so thematically, the algorithm is going to pump that information into your phone. So that's the that's the sort of algorithmic explanation to what you are experiencing, but it wouldn't be able to just predict in the absence of all those inputs.
Thank you, sir, listening for my question.
Good. Let's take a couple of questions. You first, and then.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I am K.M. Tamim Abdullah, a student from Jahangirnagar University. I would like to answer any of you from the panel. What kind of models or of governance can South Asian countries can adopt against emerging AI risk or data colonialism while promoting innovation and equitable development? Adding to that, I would like to explain what data colonialism is. Data colonialism refers to the extraction, control, and commodification of human data like human behavior, metadata, or human interaction. That can be commodified by powerful tech companies in ways they can create new kind of colonialism analogous to historical colonialism. Thank you.
Well, let's take another one and then.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Manarat bin Rabi. I'm working as a senior executive in Friendship, a renowned NGO in Bangladesh. So as we move from siloed dataset to generally integrated big data systems, how can a rewritten global data order meaningfully protect individual and collective privacy, especially when data flows across border, jurisdictions, platforms to that individual never consent to? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Shall we respond to these two questions first? Anyone wants to go first?
I can.
Yeah, please.
You want to answer?
Please first.
Data
colonialism. I think that was the first one.
Well, I can answer that. I think to an extent, to the answer to the first question by Masudur Bhai, partially touched upon this whole issue about, where data is getting collected. And that's where the intelligence is throwing you out, what you were possibly thinking, but you didn't realize that your phone was on, the apps were on, and so the information went up. And so there are a lot of these platforms, those apps and all that we have already downloaded, and these are collecting data all in all, and this is where your colonialism story is also going, because we speak about the big data companies. They are possibly even seen now as more powerful than nations in many cases, because they are holding data and they are not holding some nonsense data. They have this data that they can intelligently make out patterns, and so have the capacity to provide very directed stuff like that. So I think the effort is already there to be able to take on such kind of pursuits. Every bit of legislation that has happened, take the EU's AI Act, the fundamental premise, and even before the AI Act had come, if you see, the European Union has been very tough on the data privacy part, and has put huge fines consistently, for the last 15 years on all these big platforms. I call it the GAFAM brigade, the Google and Apple, Facebook, that all of those entities that are all of us are now almost hooked to. They have huge amounts of data, and how they are using their data, or how they are processing their data, or how they are transmitting their data, these are in the watch of many of the entities. So the long and short of answering the second question as well as the third question is today that some of the very simple principles have to be really followed after they are legislated. First, the purpose to which the data is required, that much, time-bound manner in which that data can be picked up. Which are the entities that can pick up data? Under what terms and conditions the data fiduciaries can pick up data, can retain data, can transmit data, and what is the regulatory mechanism upon all these data fiduciaries, of course in individual countries, but also globally where there are data flows. How do you take it and handle it at a regulatory level? I think these are attempts that are already being undertaken, and this remains very fair, transparent, and really doesn't try to create one upmanship over other. And that is where when nations talk at even the UN level and at multiple levels, UN is taking a lot of steps when it comes to data, when it looks at cyber, when it looks at AI. I think that's where the pitch lies, that you have to be seen to be bringing at a homogenization where everyone has their data protected. The small countries, the small corporations shouldn't become victims of a kind of intimidation by the big guys because they have the data, or they can get away because they can think that they can be above the laws and rules. So even in US, you have seen the last few years there have been significant efforts to be able to rein in all these big players. Yes, sir.
Thank you very much. I was just informed that we are running behind a little bit. Maybe if any one of you wants to comment, Veronica wants to.
Yeah,
But
I would
very
like
quickly, please.
to help to answer the question about data colonialism. I think that to avoid that is the key word is transparency. We have to move from extraction to empowerment. And as I mentioned before adopting any platforms, we have to create a data framework, a data governance, create laws. So this could prevent to depend on malicious platforms. And second one is the civic participation is key, but we need effective civic participation, no like fake or tokenism. So for that, we need independent organizations, we need journalists, we need autonomous organizations that can be referees and not organizations that are also part of the game. Finally, I think it's essential to invest in local capacities, in technical, local technical capacities, because they are the ones that are closer to the people, the local authorities, and they can be effective watchdogs. So summarizing, the key is transparency and civic participation.
Anything, Mr. Rahman, you want to add?
No.
No? You? Good.
I think it's just one note. The gentleman, the first gentleman who asked the question about if the device is actually predicting. Forgot to mention one thing, which is your device is listening to you all the time, right? So it is possible that what you've been thinking, you're probably also verbalizing it in some ways, and so the device picked up on it, and that's a very direct way to gather that input directly from the user, and then be able to basically curate content and really facilitate marketing of that content to your device. Okay.
Thank you for that. And let's give our panelists a big round of applause. Unfortunately, we have to close down because there's some people have to leave, they have to catch a flight. It was a fascinating session. There were lots of wonderful insight. Unfortunately, we're running behind. Otherwise, we could have continued for another hour or so. Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you.
Picture, right?
Thank you very much. I'm requesting the speakers to come to the front for a group picture.
Good evening, everyone. A warm welcome to all of our local and international national guests. My name is Tanzila Hussain, Research Assistant, Center for Government Studies. Our next session will focus on the topic, the human century, building a moral economy for a planet in peril. This important discussion will explore how our values, choices, and responsibilities can shape our more sustainable future. To guide us through this meaningful topic, we are honored to have our distinguished speakers. We have Mr. Kallol Bhattacharya, Senior Assistant Editor, The Hindu, India. And we also have Constantino Javier, Senior Fellow, Center for Social and Economic Progress, India. Then we have Jane Khan, Editor, Diplomatic Affairs, Minute Mirror newspaper, Pakistan. And we also have Abdullah Rashid, former Minister of State for Education, Maldives. And last, not the least, Nishan De, Executive Director, Verit Research, Sri Lanka. And we also have our moderator, Apon Johir, Senior Researcher, Center for Government Studies. All of our speakers shared their insights on moral economy and human responsibility. The session will continue under the guidance of our moderator, Apon Johir. Thank you all for joining us. Now I would like to hand over the session to our moderator. Thank you.
Hello. Hello. Am I audible? Yes. Thank you. Hello and welcome everyone to the final plenary session of the Bay of Bengal Conversation 2025. Thank you all so much for spending 3 days with us, having so many different conversations on so many different topics, all of which are vital for shaping our collective future. The topic we have chosen as the last, the topic for the last plenary session we have with us is the human century, building a moral economy for a planet in peril. I received perks of being an organizer, I suppose, is that you receive a lot of feedback from the speakers. And I'm very pleased that our titling this year and also our blurbs have resonated with so many people, and I have received a lot of positive feedback. So I would like to just read this blurb out because I think it's very interesting. This century will test not just our intelligence, but our conscience. Progress has come at a cost we can no longer ignore. Rising seas, burning forests, broken economies, and the quiet erosion of empathy. Growth without responsibility has left the planet weary and people divided. Yet, crisis also brings a rare opportunity to begin again, to build an economy that values care as much as competition and dignity as much as data. The question is simple but urgent. Can we build a future that serves humanity, not just markets? The answer will define whether the next 100 years belong to humans or just to history. So I have with us a very distinguished panel, but it is unfortunately a manual. We tried our best, but we had a lot of issues with dropouts at the last moment. But I hope you will tolerate us for just a little bit. I would like to begin by asking the former minister this fundamental question, I believe the main question of the plenary. What is a moral economy? And perhaps the minister can take to the podium and give his answer.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah wa salatu wa salam ala Rasulillah. My fellow panelists and other distinguished guests and participants, Assalamu alaikum and very good evening. I can say we have a very important topic. I'm sure all the topics are important, and the topic we are going to discuss is definitely important. The moral economy. Now the question is, our economy in the world, is it moral? If an economy is moral, how do we know that that's a moral economy or not? There are certain indicators to see whether the economy is moral or not. One of the fundamental indicators is the equal distribution of wealth in the world. If we take example from a country, in the people in the country, I can say our world economy is not really a moral economy. You may wonder why I said this. There are reasons. The wealthiest 1% of the world's population holds about 46% of global total wealth. Since this is a fact, can we say that we have a moral economy? Definitely no, we can't say that. Similarly, the top 10% of adults hold roughly 76% of the total global wealth. And another surprising evidence is that the bottom 50% of the world population owns barely just 1% of the world's wealth. We are talking about 4.1 billion people owns only 1% of the world's wealth. That is why we cannot say our current economy is a moral economy. And then, since we are in Bangladesh, I think we have to look at how the economic system in the Bangladesh as well. When I checked it, I found that the top 10% of the population in Bangladesh controls 58.5% of the nation's wealth. Therefore, in Bangladesh also, it's not a really moral economy. Now the question is, how can we build a moral economy? In order to build a moral economy, what we need to do is there should be equal distribution of wealth in the country. In every country, we have vulnerable group. They are always depending on others. Some countries are depending on donor countries. within the country, vulnerable peoples are depending on the government or they are depending on donors. If this dependency is there, always this inequality will remain. Therefore, in order to break this down, what we need to do is we have to promote human capital within the country, providing education and training, make these vulnerable people employable. Then they will have an opportunity to work and to earn and to contribute to the country's economy. Anyone who is not contributing country's economy will be a liability to the economy. Therefore, in order to make them independent, what we need to do is, especially the vulnerable people, should get the education, should get the skills, and they should be ready to contribute to the economy. Then the distribution of nation's wealth will become to an equal and fair manner. With this, I conclude my part here. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. That was beautiful. So the question of how to build a moral economy, we heard from a former statesman. So I would like now to ask basically the same question to our distinguished panelist, Mr. Kolo. How do we build a moral economy?
Am I audible? Okay, good. Well, I think for me as a journalist and a writer who writes on public policies and foreign affairs, what I feel is that not just economic policies or even foreign policies, all public policies must take the last man or the last person or the last woman standing. I think that's really the test of public policy. Because if the public policies are not really relevant to the last person in the queue, then I'm not sure if public policies would really pass the test of legitimacy. And I think here I'm just making a point of principle, because if we really have to make public policies and come to the issue of, as you are raising, moral economy, in this age of algorithm-driven public sentiments and algorithm-driven public debates, I think very often what's lost is the fact that we have to remember the weakest person in the human society that we inhabit. Our societies have marginalized communities, women, people from the minority communities, people who don't have the ready access to I would say, the top of the pyramid kind of resources, who often have access to the leftover items in the social or the government distribution network. So I think it's essential to remember that any public policy that we make, say, for example, if I have to go to war tomorrow, then, or if I have to launch an economic policy tomorrow, I have to remember that this particular policy must remember that the last person standing in my society is going to be impacted by it. I'm always reminded of this interaction that the late Prime Minister Manmohan Singh had reportedly with the editors of Financial Times in London when he was the finance minister of India in the 1990s. Reportedly, Dr. Singh went to the Financial Times office and he met the editors of Financial Times. And as usual, editors of FT had wonderful ideas about what should be done to the Indian economy. And Dr. Singh said smilingly that, yes, I can do everything that you want me to do, but the problem is tomorrow 1 million people are going to die. So I have to remember that that particular touchstone of public policy that, very often the last person in the society, the weak, the disenfranchised, or the people who are likely to be disenfranchised in an authoritarian society, these are the people who are going to be most affected by public policy, or if there is not a moral economy. I would say that that's really the test. And of course, I'm borrowing very, very generously from the Rawlsian position, because I think
I'm not making a grand demand from moral economy or public policy makers. I'm not asking them to be equality oriented. I don't want them to be equity oriented. I'm just saying be fair. Just remember to be fair. Just remember whatever you do is going to affect the weakest person in the society. And if you remember that, then you would be restrained in your policies in some ways. So I think moral economy to me is that economy where the last man or the last woman or the last person standing in the teller counter would get that chance before the teller counter closes, and he or she would be entertained. That's it.
Yes, I do understand that is one, the Rawlsian take on economic advancement. But I would like to then come to Dr. Nishan and pose a follow-up question to that. The question about economic investment as currently understood and the ends that we are measuring and pursuing, could it be collectively misdirecting us about human ends? What kind of rethinking is needed? How shall we step in the direction of agreeing on a modified set of human priorities and pursuits for our world? And is this already happening?
Thank you, Apan. I think I feel guilty in a way, or must confess that my profession, economics, and economists are greatly responsible for the kind of erosion of moral concerns and value concerns in the world. And it arises mainly from perhaps a overly misrepresented view of what Adam Smith said when discussing self-interest, that somehow that magically by some invisible hand, people acting in their self-interest leads us to a world in which the common interest or the mutual social interest is taken forward. I want to say that the actual way, the way in which economists look at self-interest is different. They look at it the same way that aeronautical engineers think about gravity. It is the main reason why you can't fly, and self-interest is the main reason why you can't advance the social interest. But aeronautical engineers then look for clever ways to harness gravity, the precise thing that's a problem, for the solution. And that's how the wing of a plane is shaped in a way that when you go fast enough, gravity, which results in lower pressure on top of the wing rather than at the bottom of the wing, allows the plane to pick up. So it's about creating devices to use the very thing that's a problem towards becoming a solution, not to celebrate gravity as the solution to flying, and I think we've got that wrong. Now, the second aspect of that problem is, I think, that economists have concentrated on measuring things and focusing all our attention to advancing the things that we can measure. And of course, GDP has become this thing. Now, but in reality, if you're an economist, you don't talk about GDP, you talk about utility. You mean some measure of human well-being, but because you don't know how to measure that, you end up measuring GDP. And this is a means of getting to better well-being, but the means can become the end, and ultimately we focus on increasing GDP and lose the connection between GDP and human well-being, which is the focus of today. Now, somewhere in the 90s, Mahbub-ul-Haq, the Pakistani economist, and the Indian economist Amartya Sen came up with what's called the Human Development Index, in which they said, look, let's get past GDP, and let's also measure some literacy or educational attainment. Now we use years of schooling, and let's measure life expectancy, recognizing that health and education were integral parts of human well-being. Now, my quick proposal today is that we need to look at ways of actually advancing or filling out that HDI, which hasn't got enough traction, And we need to bring in, instead of just years of schooling attainment, for instance, the PISA test, right? The Program on International Student Attainment, which is a globally doable test, which is showing much better than any other test in the world, the actual ability or capability that is achieved through schooling. We need to put in place, perhaps, like Kalol said, one of the Rawlsian ideas is that everybody has a basic minimum, and that's why we need to perhaps incorporate a measure of poverty in the Human Development Index. But most importantly, what we may have missed and failed to understand is the importance of reducing inequality. Now, Joe Stiglitz with 6 economists brought a report to the G20 recently and said inequality must be treated like climate change as a global emergency. Now, there's an open letter signed by over 600 economists in over 70 countries in the world supporting that view, that we must bring inequality back into the center of measuring human well-being and flourishing. So I think it is clear that economists have failed in a way by prioritizing self-interest too much and focusing too much on GDP. And we need to start shifting into thinking about human well-being afresh and start by changing what we measure. In getting there, we have 2 problems just before we finish. The first problem is what I call the prisoner's dilemma problem, if you all want to look that up. It's actually an economic theory that shows that people acting in their self-interest don't advance mutual interest, but undermine mutual interest because they lack the capacity to coordinate and trust each other. So solving the prisoner's dilemma dynamic for the world, for things like climate change or any kind of public good, even inequality, requires a coordinated approach, without which we will fail to solve these problems only as individuals or as nations. And secondly, the importance of rethinking where we have come to in our understanding of how to do economics. Now, Fukuyama famously published a book called The End of History, imagining that we had come to the end of our understanding of how to govern the world and economics. I think we need to question that thesis and put effort into thinking that where we have arrived in our technocratic abilities or thinking or methodological approach to economics is not the end of history. It is time to think again, and global collaboration to do that is extremely important. Let me stop here to come back later. Yeah.
Thank you, Nishan. So it's very interesting that you mentioned Fukuyama's End of History. I know that our panelist, Constantino, is a disciple of Fukuyama. and perhaps when we are talking about a moral economy, we also need to find practical ways to implement such an economy. So I would ask Constantino to build up on what Nishan was talking about.
Thank you. Not really a disciple at all. In fact, the opposite. He taught me 20 years ago when we were all, I think, reading his book on the end of history and the last man standing, talking Kalo to last man and last women standing in queues. And I remember being in those seminar rooms with Francis Fukuyama, and it didn't sound right to me. You know, you're young, you're meeting a big professor, star at that point in the US, but I was a bit uncomfortable with this idea that there would be a natural lineage of political and economic progression, of universalization of democracy. Everyone would be middle class, everyone would be living in democracies around the world, and therefore the end of history, right? That was the big thesis. But, I mean, let me therefore start with a sort of confession, as I'm very uncomfortable when I read this abstract. And let me explain to you a little bit why, and I think why we have to push ourselves a little bit in this day and age as we look around in the world. We're not in the seminar rooms that I was sitting 20 years ago. We're not sitting in the same liberal, unipolar world driven by the US and a bunch of multilateral institutions 20 years ago. We're living in a very, very different world 20 years later. And when I hear phraseology as moral economy, I get nervous because I really don't know what morality means. You ask a Chinese minister, what is morality? You will get one answer. You ask Mr. Trump and people in the MAGA crowd, what is morality? What is a moral economy? You'll get a very different answer. You ask people in the global south, what is a moral economy? You'll get a third set of answers. My point is I just get nervous when we infuse politics in what you were saying, Nishant, which is an economic endeavor towards development, towards, frankly, material self-satisfaction for humanity. And I'm not sure, or I'd say there are many possible moral ways to achieve that. And we have to de-addict ourselves, maybe, of a certain morality, which I think is apparent in the abstract of this panel, which is apparent in the language that we speak in this panel and in these rooms these days, which equate, as you did, Kalol, economic development and fairer, more moral, you said, economic development with democracy.
Public policy, yeah.
No, you said a more authoritarian, you said, system is a less moral economy, or is less... I mean, I'm just asking us to introspect and think from a global south perspective today, that a scientific record of economists who have tried to achieve and accelerate economic development, and maybe step back from the political path and judgments we have made and assumptions, Washington consensus, for example, conditionalities of multilateral aid, ideas about governance that supposedly lead to better development. And I'm not contesting and saying they're necessarily bad, but I think it's certainly in this day and age, we need to introspect and pause a little bit when words such as morality come in. Because they can lead also to a lot of disastrous agendas. And let me bring in the United States of America again for the last 20 years, which has led to policies that have been disastrous for global south and developing countries, riding the idea of a more moral, human, just, equal economy, including military interventions, issues such as state building and nation building. I mean, what is nation building, right? And we have seen 20 years, if not more, of these ideas. Now, I'm not coming in defense. You may think, here's someone who's making a great defense of the Chinese model of a one-party-led state. Not at all. But I think that the one-party state in China and its success and growth in terms of delivering developmental solutions, certainly much faster than the Indian model. And again, I'm a defender of the Indian democratic development model. But it begs us to question, what models do we want to deliver? What economies do we want to deliver? And what are the political paths for those economic growth stories? And I think that's just a question I have. I like ending with questions, because I think that's the fun thing about these discussions, and especially after 3 days of a conference where we all sat together here and discussed, and we're all tired and we want to go home. But I think I really would like everyone to question when we hear issues of morality, justice, and economic development. And to end, Nishant, I think you're being very harsh on your profession. You economists have done a very good job. It's just a job which is finding developmental solutions, growth solutions. I mean, the SDGs are not about morality. There's one article, 14 or 16, about governance institutions that was smuggled in by, I think, mostly Western countries. But it's not about morality from a political value, ethics perspective. It is about material self-fulfillment, health, education.
SGDs are also not from the economists, but
but it is an economic exercise. It is. And I think that is what economics should restrict themselves to. Right. And maybe there I'll be harsh on economists when they go into issues like moral economy and what is a fair economy. I'm not sure that's the right... There, yes, please. Then we have to have different professions looking at this, including political scientists maybe. But the idea of growth needs to be thought in parallel and not necessarily in conjunction always with certain political models and values of morality. And I'll end on that. Morality is a very big word. It's been around. I'll confess that I'm a big fan of the old Stoics and cynics and realists. One of my favorite philosophers of all was Plutarch, who kept saying the only thing new in the world is the history we don't know. So looking backwards maybe will make us also a little bit more humble to think about what is moral, what has been moral. Maybe things 2,000, 3,000 years ago were extremely moral and certainly more moral than in this day and age, where we supposedly, according to Frank Fukuyama, think we're so much more developed, so much more advanced than 2,000 years ago. No, I don't think so. I think actually we're pretty much the same in terms of the gross national happiness of humanity as we were 2,000 or 4,000 years ago.
So, thank you for that very realistic on the question that we have at our hand right now. But there's a lot to dive into that to follow after that. But I would like to zoom out a little bit and look at this question from a more geopolitical angle, if I may. And for that, I would like the assistance of Zain. The question I have for you is, given that building a moral economy is not just for nations in isolation, but involves global commitments and solving many collective action problems, are there examples or new ideas for engaging the politics of our world to reshape the economics of our world in the shape of being more human? What steps can we take in that direction?
Thank you so much, Apun, for inviting me. I look at this question explicitly from a IR theoretical macro framework. The core challenge posed by this question, achieving collective action for a moral economy, is best understood through the lens of realism. I mean, realists, particularly structural realists, would argue that the international system's condition of anarchy fundamentally constrains the depth and effectiveness of any global commitments. States are the primary actors, and their actions are ultimately driven by the pursuit of security and relative gains. For this perspective, initiatives to build a moral economy are essentially a byproduct. They're secondary to power politics. While states might agree on climate accords or financial regulations, realists would argue that these commitments will be abandoned or weakened the moment they conflict with a great power's core national interest, such as economic competitiveness or military advantage. Therefore, the steps taken in this direction will always be limited by necessity of self-help in an anarchic world order. Now, if we look at it from a liberalism standpoint, the moral economy doctrine, liberal institutionalism provides the primary theoretical framework for addressing the problem of collective action and reshaping global economy. Liberals argue that while the system may be anarchic, international institutions and economic interdependence can significantly mitigate these effects. Institutions like the WTO, the SCO, or the G20 provide forums for repeated interaction, reduce transaction costs, and increase transparency, making it easier for states to achieve absolute gains, especially shared benefits. Examples like creation of global public goods initiatives demonstrate steps taken in the direction of a more human economy. These initiatives rely on the liberal idea that states can and will trade short-term competitive gains for long-term mutually beneficial cooperation. Reshaping the world order in this direction requires strengthening and deepening these institutions, making them more inclusive, and leveraging the power of non-state actors like NGOs and multinational corporations to influence states towards greater global accountability and moral governance. Now, if we look at South Asia in this perspective, for the nations of South Asia, a region grappling with immense domestic development needs, transboundary resource conflicts like water sharing, and severe impacts of climate change, this debate between realism and liberalism is not merely academic. States in the region often resort to realist calculations on issues of security and trade, prioritizing national growth over regional collective action, as seen in the limited scope of groups like SAARC. Yet the region's shared vulnerability to environment, rising seas, the economy, necessitates a liberal commitment to a multilateral solution and resource pooling. The ultimate question for South Asia and the world remains: can the immediate security-driven interests of sovereign states, the foundation of realism, be overcome by the compelling long-term necessity of collective survival and human dignity as championed by the liberal theory? Thank you.
Thank you. There's a little bit of debate going on between realism and, well, more of like a rebellion going on, like a realist rebellion on the panel right now. So I'd like to ask the same question to Kolo, just to rephrase, just to restate the question. Given that building a moral economy is not just for nations in isolation, but involves global commitments and solving many collective action problems, are there examples of new ideas for engaging the politics of our world to reshape the economies of our world in the shape of being more human?
Well, I think I'm going to start with what you just talked about, Ishan, because also what Tino mentioned, and of course the realism. I think the big issue, rather the big disjuncture that we are facing right now, and I'm glad that you mentioned the MDGs. The issue is that today we have these gigantic, the wonderful universal development goals that are multilaterally agreed upon, and what happens after that is that this is again I'm targeting the democratic societies, democratic governments. Is that after these universal schemes are debated and adopted in global platforms, democratic leaderships return to their countries and go back to politics as usual. So what we have here today is this great disjuncture between the universal, the advocacy of the universal welfare, or say issues that are meant for the planet. At the same time, we have the same people who are talking about welfare of the planet are going back to their societies and practicing domestic exclusivist politics. And again, this is meant for countries that are democratic. I'm not talking about China here very clearly. What I find is that there is a great deal of inconvenient conversation that needs to be conducted on this particular sort of disjuncture, where we know what is good for us globally. We acknowledge them, we acknowledge the goals, and then we adopt them with grand joint declarations from the wonderfully titled platforms like G20, the United Nations, etc. And then the leaderships go back to the electoral mode where we are back to MAGA. We are back to all sorts of other majoritarian identity politics. Of course, I think these sort of politics, this sort of exclusivist politics, makes for obviously spectacular electoral victories, as we are seeing. And some of the numbers that these political leaders are coming up from these democratic elections are absolutely mind-boggling, because it's really, really unthinkable in such social media-driven, obviously highly opinionated societies. We have these electoral numbers of two-thirds majority and even bigger majority, thumping majority in most of these democratic elections. And at the end of the day, what happens to those globally acknowledged goals that were adopted? So this disjuncture that we see in what is good for the planet, what is acknowledged and adopted for the planet, and then what the democratic societies do domestically, that calls for greater transparency and a great deal more discussion. I think I would let it go there.
Well, thank you so much. I wanted to circle back around to something that Constantino said to Nishan, a bit of a challenge perhaps. Do you think you have something to add or to say to that as well?
Absolutely. I think it's really good to kind of take this conversation, further. One is, what Kalol is saying is highlighting this, what I call the prisoner's dilemma problem. We have a coordination problem that's preventing us solving a catastrophic, potentially catastrophic problem for all of humanity, climate change. Let's not be sanguine about that. And imagine that, there isn't a global coordination problem that if we don't solve, we collectively undermine the future of human well-being.
And I just want to make one point. Historically speaking, global leaders have not really met each other so often as they do these days.
Yeah, even then they are not able to do it.
They are literally meeting each other every fortnight.
And so we still, and that SGDs, while you said they're great, actually nobody's learning how to measure them, track them, make them the center of progress and all that. But here's where, Tino, I think we agree more than we disagree, because your complaint about morality, I think, comes from recognizing that everybody has a different method, a different way of thinking what's moral or not, etc., right? And effectively, I think it's Alexander Pope, the poet, who said, or forms of government may fools contend, whatever is best administered is best. And I hear him in your voice. If you get the outcome, let's not worry about how we got there, because after all, isn't the outcome more important? I absolutely agree. But the outcome has a moral face to it. So Amartya Sen, in his book, Ideas of Justice, does a really good job of cutting through this problem of relatively different approaches to thinking about morality or justice, but huge agreement in what the outcomes ought to be in all these differences, different theories that we have about justice. So he really focuses on justice. And I think you are also saying that we have substantial capacity to agree on good outcomes and justice. And I think we're just using a different language. We are saying, well, those outcomes need to have some kind of value dimension. Why do we care about not having poverty? That's a value dimension, right? Why do we care about health or education? There's a value dimension there. So we are using the word morality not as systems of government, at least in the way I'm talking about it, but as outcomes in human lives that we want to advance and do that collectively. So I think that I agree with you that it is not about Fukuyama's idea that both democracy and capitalism was the end of history. And I'm agreeing with you that neither of them is the end of history. That democracy may not be the end of history. We may find other forms of government that work better for us. And capitalism is not the end of history. And both may be failing us quite substantially.
Yes.
And need to be rethought. But then rethought from a perspective of saying, human flourishing is still the goal. Otherwise, what is, right?
What is human flourishing?
That's very good. We can't agree on all aspects of it, but can we agree on... Can we agree on some? That basic necessities being met for all human beings is part of that. That educational attainment of a certain sort, that human beings need to have access to education, and it is not merely literacy as being able to sign your name. The capacity to function in your society with dignity. And again, that's Rawlsian color, that dignity is a basic element of human well-being. That if you rob people of dignity, you undermine them, their humanity. So I think these are not controversial. We can, from China to Japan to the United States, we can agree that there's a set of human outcomes on which we can get substantial agreement, and SGDs did that in a very complex way. I'm saying let's do that in a slightly lesser way, but more than what we are doing now, and keep them as a measurable focus that we bring the world around into progressing and advancing. And the politics of doing that requires us to figure out the ways we build consensus, and maybe it's not so tough. If we could get agreement on SJDs and globalize that, then we can get agreement on a lesser set, which we can actually concretely measure. Because as you say, economists have sort of this, it's a human thing, right? What you can measure, you focus on, and you advance, and there is a merit to that. But the demerit is if you measure the wrong kinds of things, or neglect really important things. So let me stop there, because I do feel that your discomfort with morality is a discomfort with processes or systems, but the outcomes are also moral, or have some moral flavor to them, and being able to agree on them or some new subset may be the way we advance the world.
No, I'm going to allow Konstantin to respond to that, but I do want the response to be within short, 2 to 3 minutes, and then we will move on to the third round and audience Q&A.
Good. And we also have, 2 of us have a plane to catch, so. But no, great stuff. I wish we could go on and on. One, agree, Nishant, yes, but it is a causality between a political philosophy and a system and development, the material and the immaterial. And you can quantify happiness. The Bhutanese have developed a system to quantify it. But look at the...
Not very happy with that, yeah.
But look at the surreality of it, right? Quantifying happiness, madness for me, okay? But, and you know what I'm speaking from an economist, and even from a human... Listen, how can you quantify happiness? But I hope there's no Bhutanese here. No, the Bhutanese Prime Minister was here recently. Maybe he's left, hopefully, already, but that's a separate debate. So the relation between the material and the moral, that is something that interests me a lot. I agree with you that there's many ways to the material, many moral ways to the material. But we cannot, I'm just inviting us all, this is again a real appeal, is that we have to rethink the paths that we assumed were natural, of a certain morality. In the Global South, when I speak to people, they ask me, what does democracy deliver? Deliver, concretely, materially. What does a one-party state deliver for my health, my education, my water access? So let us revisit, and particularly in the Global North, that causality. Right? And not just the idea of principles. It is a good thing because it's nice to have democracy, because there's dignity, because we can flourish, because we're happier, or because it's just as it is. Democracy is a better system. These are, I think, systems that we have to re-question, and it is good, therefore. And that's the only part I like in this abstract, which is it speaks about crisis and opportunity. By the way, very Chinese tandem, as you know. In every crisis, there's an opportunity, which is for the Global North. Say if you're here from the development aid sector, from Germany or France or the EU or the US, you have to rethink what development means and how to deliver on development in synchronization with what is required, and by the way, in competition with alternative development models that did not exist 50 years ago. The socialist Soviet Union had one that collapsed eventually, but China today has a different one. India has a different development model. So you have to decide which are the ones that are more similar or not, according to politics. 2 quick points. I don't know if there's any philosopher in the room. One of my favorite philosophers, Bruno Latour, a French philosopher, who said we were never modern. For those who know what modernity is, it's an illusion. We thought we were modern, that's why we talk about post-modernity. Kalol and my friend, I think we never were, frankly, liberal. What liberal institutions? What liberal institutions, sanctions, invasions of other countries were reflections of power in the 1945s and 1950s? The United Nations Security Council is a liberal body, right? It's a syndicate of a few powers that arrogated themselves of power and have fleshed out institutions, monetary, financial, economic, political institutions that cemented asymmetry in the global order and pursued a certain model with benefits and some problems, as all models. So I don't think liberal institutions are dying, let's face it. And coming to the last point on climate, therefore, I don't want to be only skeptical. Look at the climate space, Nishant. Liberal institutions or institutions, multilateral institutions, so-called universal institutions like the COP framework, right, under the UN, are slowly dying. I've been writing reports about this for the last 5 years. People called us mad 5 years ago. Today they realize that it's not against the COP or the UN, but that actually there are many more ancillary institutions that have been developed for climate action. Sector-wise and geography-wise, we have now banking systems that are talking about climate finance. We now have an international solar alliance, for example, on renewables, and clubs, different smaller clubs that are actually doing tremendous action on climate. So there are many ways, again, to decarbonization, and we can't be focused on, oh, this beautiful liberal institutional UN that was there, and in the case of the climate was there, and still is important, as we saw in Brazil, though with decreasing importance. So let us find also new avenues to develop collective action, which is a problem, but I'm not as skeptical, actually. I'm quite positive that humanity and, frankly, more individual, I agree. I mean, this idea that we were all universal and there's a disjunction, we all become protectionist and nationalists. I don't know, were we ever
ultra-nationalist?
No, I don't know. I'm not sure about this. I'm not sure that we were ever beautifully liberal internationally and engaged in, like you said, we would go for 50 years to multilateral frameworks and pretend to be multilateralists. We were not. Talk to the Chinese, talk to Indians, talk to Global South on trade. Was that multilateral and fair? It was not. It was a deep and unequal system structured in power. And I think revisiting that and coming back home, being more protectionist now, supposedly, which is bad, I'm not sure there's opportunities there for a rebalancing, for countries to reassess their national interest, and then forward again opportunities for collective action on climate, on energy, on migration, on many issues that will be problematic and warrant collective action, but maybe in a different way from the one we've had over the last 75 years.
But very quickly, because see, you mentioned Nishant Amartya Sen. Sen said, and also he wrote a book about development as freedom.
Yes.
If I say morality is freedom, because we are in Bangladesh, and we saw what happened last year in Bangladesh, Sheikh Hasina had the same principle, that she gave development. So therefore, you better be grateful to me and keep voting for me. This country voted for morality as freedom. So again, I think the issue is what you're saying. I get you fully, but then countries, when you say countries, I mean, the countries that I look at are the decolonized societies. And we have never been part of the Vienna Accord or Vienna Concord of the 19th century. We are not part of that multilateralism. We are not, when I was researching 1919 League of Nations, was Bangladesh or who are the people representing India, the princely states. The princes were representing India. So were we there at the beginning, at that multilateralism? No, we aren't there. So certainly, we can't talk about countries like all countries are equal. We are decolonized societies, and we have to remember where we come from. So I think, I would like to be a little more careful when talking about the fact that, of course, I love, fast delivery of public goods like the Chinese model. But then for me, freedom and the auxiliary items that come with freedom are equally important. And I think I'm saying this because I don't want to miss out to the context that we are here.
Human agency and dignity are essential
Absolutely.
parts of sensing human. Of course, when you can't measure them and how you talk about them, there are complications. But let's not shove them aside completely, right? So, but I think of course we don't disagree with Tino. He's simply saying, let's focus on the outcomes too.
Listen, the paradox today is that you have in authoritarian societies, in the Gulf countries and in China, better libraries with more knowledge than in democratic global South countries. That is a paradox I want us to think about. How do you have universities in China?
We are not holding the flag for democracy in the way we
Nor am I for Chinese libraries, which I would not like to study. That is a paradox.
Chinese media.
Yes, thank you for the very dynamic interventions. I believe it's almost time to round out this panel. I'm going to give it to our minister to round it up, but as he's giving his closing speech, if anyone has any questions, please, there are open mics available. Just stand in front of them. After the minister has given his final remarks, I'll take questions, and we don't have that much time. So a few questions for panelists, and then after the Q&A, we'll wrap up the session. So, Mr. Abdullah, I think we heard a lot of debate and discussion, right? But from your experience as a statesman, what do you think actually works in the current world that we live in? How do we promote humanity? What is the answer to individualism and the way society is functioning at the moment, which leads to these kind of debates? And how do we promote social capital in general?
Okay, thank you. Even my fellow panelists mentioned about the moral economy, and materialism is, I think, one thing we should highlight. We know that in the current world, most of the people are very materialistic. When we become so much materialistic, we forget about others. We forget about the society. We forget about even the environment. As a reason, we are lacking the social capital. We are interested only financial capital. Now the question is, what is social capital? I'm sure you all know what social capital is. Social capital includes promoting trust and nurturing relationship, participating in the community, promoting the well-being of the society. Therefore, in a more humanistic approach for the moral economy, my suggestion is we should have time to think about others. We should have time to think about our own environment. In the expense of the environment, we should not become rich in terms of economy. We can see the world's richest country, the USA. In the first term of the President Trump, USA has withdrawn from Paris Agreement, for which really people were worried about. Then again, when Biden becomes the president, again USA joined. And now again, President Trump is in the presidency. And he again decided to withdraw from Paris Agreement, saying that they cannot compromise their economic wealth. So we can see that people are interested only becoming rich by forgetting about the consequence of that. Therefore, since the time is already behind the time, I'm not going to talk much time. But I really call upon everyone present here. Let's try to promote social capital, meaning that let's promote the relationship. Let's take care of the others. We should not believe that the saying end means end justify the means. No. If we talk about the moral economy, we should not believe that. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Minister. So I will take questions now. Please walk up to the mic, and you can ask a question to the whole panel or to a certain panelist if you want.
My name is Minhajul Islam. My question is to the whole panel, especially regarding the idea of development model and economic model. In the post-colonial or say underdeveloped countries or developing countries, development is usually treated synonym of industrialization, privatization, and especially in India and Bangladesh, the economists seem to advocate this development process as standard experience, referring the Western experience over the years, or the Chinese experience, some says. My question is it really something standard experience or absolutely prescribed model of development? SDG you can think. Can't we imagine something else based on substantial informal economy that actually sustains the socio-economic fabric? Do we feel the necessity to think different approaches regarding development theories? Shouldn't we set up context-based development theories, region-based industrial process, situation-based development ideas regarding the true development related to the people of this region? Thank you.
Thank you. I'll take one more question.
Good evening to all the panelists. I'm Navid. I'm a student of economics from Dhaka University. As a student of economics, I was kind of enjoying the session. There was a lot of interesting topics, inequality, social capital. So as we talk about building a moral economy, there are some topics that comes into my mind is the geopolitics. There is certainly geopolitical irony. There is the problem of moral hazard. So my question to all the panelists, anyone can answer, there is major powers in the Bay of Bengal region, they preach climate morality too much, but when it comes to applications, they basically finance fossil fuel expansion and militarization. So how should a country like Bangladesh respond to this duality without undermining its strategic relationships with its neighbors? Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, one more question, but that's it for now, please.
Thank you. My name is Shamir. I'm a policy researcher. So I think the very title of this conversation, the last two words, the planet in peril, I think perhaps demanded bit of clarifications here before going the moral debates. So if we really consider the planet is in peril, I think a simple way to explain it, the 9 planetary boundaries, out of which 7 is overshoot beyond their safe operating space. So, and the reason or drivers is the per capita footprint or the emissions or ecological footprint is way, way much higher in the global north than in the global south. But to deal with this crisis, the multilateral governance mechanism that is set up in 1930s and 1940s there was a context of, there is a colonial root out there. And the way those institutions are built and structured is, and the way it's operating is no different than the colonial structure of exploitation, appropriation, and I don't see any difference. So in this context, 3 of the speakers referred to why this, particularly on the climate context, this multilateralism is not working. The planet is already like warmer 1.5 degrees. The people are talking to keeping it like below 2 degrees Celsius. I find it very ridiculous. But anyway, my questions would be the middle part of this Bay of Bengal conversation, the rupture part. If we really, many would argue, I mean, there are many folks out there, and many of you follow that we are really heading toward a multipolar world or multipolar governance mechanism, perhaps. In that context, do you see there are opportunities or opening, maybe a bigger ruptures that can open up that avenue for cooperations in dealing with some of the existential kind of crisis that we are facing, including climate, as well as some of it may be driven by frontier technology.
For rupture.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm going to let the panel answer each of these questions, the one about development model and economic model, the one about inconsistent application of morality in the region, and also opportunities for rupture. But do keep in mind that some of you have to go to the airport soon, so please have mercy on your panelists and try to answer as briefly as possible. Anyone can take any of those questions.
So I would just take that on multipolarity, which is talked about here. I was just talking about it, I think, in a studio setup here 2 days ago, and I said that multipolarity, and very often what we hear in New Delhi is plurilateralism, is not just an option for large powers. This is also an option for middle powers and smaller countries, because remember that the bloc politics of the non-aligned period was between the big 2 East and Western blocs. But today what we have is essentially an example of multipolarity. And if you are telling, say, the superpower of the world that, hey, listen, I can't come with you because I believe in multipolarity, your smaller neighbors can also tell you that, listen, I also believe in multipolarity, and my pole is someone else and not you. So the point is that this is a good sign in one way, because it indicates a greater democratization of the Committee of Nations, but this also opens up ways for ruptures, and that's why I believe it's not just about strict economics. I think it's also a great deal about political awareness among the developing societies, where I believe that we have to have more and more dialogue so that these great ruptures don't emerge and don't surprise us.
Right, thank you. So anyone else wants to take any of the other 2 questions?
Yeah, I'll just focus on the Bay of Bengal one, and to end on a very positive note. And after three days to focusing on, it's called the Bay of Bengal conversation. We really have to think of our location. We talked a lot about big things, morality, economy, global. 2 points I want to anchor that I think are fertile for more work in the Bay of Bengal, that relate to a better economy, and forget moral, forget geopolitics, connect with each other. We have not connected with each other. This is, according to the World Bank, the region that has most grown in the last 20 years at 5-6% of the entire world, but we are still below the levels of connectivity in terms of infrastructure, transportation, energy that we were in the 1960s between Bangladesh, Myanmar, Bangladesh, Bhutan, Bangladesh, India, Nepal, India, Sri Lanka, India. We are behind the curve. Let us connect and build the hardware to build then the software of the economies, whether they're moral, immoral, we can deal with that. First, we have to find the roads, the railways, the ports, the transmission lines to allow us to move capital and people across this region, one. Second is state capacity. I'm worried about state capacity. That's maybe because I'm a political scientist. We can talk about moral economy again, economics, geopolitics. If we don't have a capable state, and this is not political leaders that come and go every 4 or 5 years or 10 years or 20 years. This is about technocrats. This is about bureaucrats. This is about civil servants, people who know to look at finance deals, to look at transportation agreements, who measure out the terms of connectivity and take long-term policy horizons to deliver development to their countries. I think that state capacity is limited. It's being attacked by other actors in many ways, private sector in particular, and I think an investment in state capacity today is a very wise tool in order to then find, accelerate more development in this region.
Thank you so much. I think, would you like
so I think, thank you for all those questions. And if I kind of summarize where we are at, this Bay of Bengal conversation is so important because I do think that the world is changed by conversations. And when we say democracy, we don't really mean voting. We mean government by conversation. And when human beings are able to talk and really talk, as perhaps we're doing here, we change the way we think, we change the way we imagine, and we change the way we act, and that's the power. And I think for us, it is important to stop or overcome perhaps a colonial heritage of waiting for the West to solve the problems, waiting for the West to take leadership and act. And imagine in this Bay of Bengal conversation that what we are doing here is suggesting that we can start acting first. We can give leadership to the world in the direction it should move. The way you solve a prisoner's dilemma problem, I've kept saying this, is to act first in trust and solidarity and confidence and allow others then to imitate you. I think we have to stop imagining that the solutions will come from the UN or the old structures of the world or the powerful countries that we imagine and think that we have the power to be first movers. And in doing that, I have proposed 2 things. One, that, all this thing about development, that we talk, and I think I like what Tino said, it's all nice talk, right? And it's cheap talk. It becomes, something concrete when we measure it, when we focus on it, and we determine collectively to deliver on it. Yes. And Tino is right to get us to delivery, and we are in agreement. But these are things that have a moral dimension, Tino. They are not immoral things. But the ability to talk and agree and then focus and deliver, not wait for foreign aid, not wait for somebody else, but do it ourselves and as we can. And I think this is the motivation that is set off by this Bay of Bengal conversation, which I'm so pleased to be a part of.
Thank you so much, Nishan. And with that beautiful end note, I would like to wrap up this session. Thank you, everyone. I'm sorry, no more time for questions. We are already overdue. Our closing session will begin very soon. And of course, some of us have flights to catch. So thank you again, honorable panelists. And thank you, our esteemed guests, for bearing with our manual and our arguments for so long. And I think the MC can close out the session for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Apollo. Thank you.
And a big round of applause for everyone.
Thank you, speakers, for your valuable insights. Now I would like to invite our speakers for a quick photo session. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for all of you who stayed till the last session and for all 3 days of the Bay of Bengal conversation this year's rendition of 2025. Bravery is when the odds are stacked against you, but you do it anyway. That's what BOBC started from. When the odds were stacked against us, even the best of the hotels wouldn't take us. Even the best of the sponsors wouldn't give us money. We were there. We were doing it. Defiant is like turning obstacle into opportunity. If we hadn't faced that obstacle on that time, we wouldn't have had this opportunity right now. So I'd like to step back and take a look at the previous BOBCs and say that last year, only last year, at this time of the third day of BOBC, I was the one ending the closing session and bringing out my boss. I said that we are the only one track to diplomatic conference of this country. This year, I'm also happy and flattered to say that we're not the only one. Someone tried to imitate us, as many of you know, but you know, they not like us. They not like us. So I would like to end with that it is not enough. A few solid people might be left, but there is not enough. People might reach out, but that is not enough. We must still keep trying and still keep building on this diplomatic way of building relationships among us. And you know, the pioneer of this conference and this whole track to diplomacy in Bangladesh, I would like to welcome to stage our president of CGS Center for Governance Studies, Mr. Zilur Rahman. Everyone, a big round of applause, please.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, dear friends. As we bring the Bay of Bengal Conversation 2025 to a close, allow me to reflect on what these 3 days have meant. For a brief moment, this ballroom became something larger than a conference venue. It became a global commons, a space where ideas traveled freely across borders, where disagreements sharpened understanding instead of dividing us, and where the Bay of Bengal, so often seen as peripheral, stood unmistakably at the center of the world's geopolitical imagination. The conversations we hosted here carried enormous weight. We explored a world where power is shifting in unpredictable ways, where alliances blur and sovereignty becomes negotiable. We debated climate change not as an environmental backdrop, but as the emerging frontline of security. We examined technology as political territory, data as a strategic resource, AI as a force that interprets us, and misinformation as a tool reshaping trust, democracy, and civic life. We spoke about enormous not as finance, but as strategy, sanctions as quiet warfare, and markets as arenas of influence. And throughout all of this, we are reminded that humanity itself is the unresolved question: who gets to belong, who gets protected, and who gets left behind. These are not just academic inquiries. They were urgent reflections of a world in transition, a world that is asking for new ideas, new leadership, and new moral frameworks. And through it all, Bangladesh hosted these conversations not as an observer, but as a convener. When we created the Bay of Bengal conversation, our ambition was clear: to brand Bangladesh as a serious, regional, and international player in geopolitics, to show that our country can host, convene, and lead track to diplomatic dialogue at the highest level, to give the Bay of Bengal region a platform where it speaks to itself and to the world. That ambition has not changed. In fact, this year, it has been reaffirmed. As I look around and see former heads of state, ambassadors, scholars, journalists, technologists, and thought leaders representing every corner of the globe, I can say with full confidence, Bangladesh has claimed its place in this landscape, and Bay of Bengal conversation is now a signature platform for the region. Every year, we challenge ourselves to improve, to raise the standard, to make the conference more rigorous, more global, more inclusive, and more meaningful. And this year, I believe we achieved something remarkable. From the depth of the discussions to the precision of our logistics, from the energy of our young participants to the sheer diversity of disciplines represented, Bay of Bengal conversation continues to set a benchmark for what an international conference in Bangladesh can be. And we promise we'll keep raising the bar. I want to extend our deepest gratitude to our partners and sponsors. Your generosity, trust, and commitment are what make this gathering possible. In a world where meaningful dialogue is increasingly rare, your support ensures that Bay of Bengal conversation remains a place where conversation still matter. To all our speakers, moderators, partners, and guests, thank you. Thank you for your time, your insights, your generosity, and your faith in this platform. Thank you for helping us build a space where ideas can breathe, call it, and inspire. I also want to especially thank the Pan-Pacific Shonagan. This hotel has been our home for so many years. And once again, your service, hospitality, and professionalism have been world-class. You are an inseparable part of the story of Bay of Bengal conversation. And now, let me speak from the heart. Behind the grandeur of this 3-day event is a very small team, a team that works through impossibly long days and nights against tight deadlines and unpredictable circumstances, constantly solving 100 problems that no one sees. They face challenges that would discourage most people. Yet, every single year, they perform with remarkable grace and determination, driven by a belief in Bangladesh, in dialogue, and in each other. They are young, committed, brilliant, and they make the impossible look effortless. To the BOBC team, this conference is your achievement. Your talent, resilience, and passion are the soul of the Bengal conversation. I'm deeply proud of you. I'll now call Team BOBC to the stage alphabetically. Abu Al Said, Abdullah Al Shobuz is not here. Anthony Gomes, Apon Jahid, Arman Mia, Bahuddin Ahmed, Devi Kormokar, and lead of this year BOBC, Dipanjali Rai. Devi is the co-lead. Famida Haq, Julian Onkun Rosario, Kaji Reed, Marjana Manaz, Mukhlesh Rahman, Luja Tabassum, our Executive Director Parvez Karim Abbasi, Pradeep Kumar Shil, Romanuddin, Muhammad Saiful Islam Shanto, Sanjoy Debnath, Shamsul Arif Fahim, Shurat Rana Rushmi, Shubir Das, man behind everything, Tanzila Hussain Toni, Tasfiya Rahman, Sain Shukyo, Tofatur Rabbi Pial, this is the BOBC team. May I join or? As we close, let us carry forward the spirit of these conversations. The Bay of Bengal is no longer a quiet corner of the map. It is one of the world's most consequential strategic theater. Dialogue is not a luxury, it is a necessity. And Bangladesh is not a spectator. It is a connector, a convener, and increasingly a leader. With that, I formally declare the Bay of Bengal Conversation 2025 closed. Thank you all, safe travels, and we look forward to welcoming you again next year in October. Thank you so much.